peace and security, and for strengthening the rule of law at the international level. Based on that commitment, we take this opportunity to first take note of the statements made by Prosecutor Ingar on the 29th of October, and secondly, to call for once and for all measures to be taken, urgently and concrete measures to be taken, including from the ICC, that Israel, the occupying power, be held accountable for the atrocious crimes that it has been committing for years with impunity in the occupied Palestinian territories. And that would include, throughout the last 3 weeks, another and regrettable spiral of violence, death, and destruction, which has cost the lives of thousands of civilian, innocent bystanders, including women and children, which can only be called, without making a mistake, a true genocide. Sir, in February of 2020, my country addressed the ICC for investigations to be conducted to investigate criminal responsibility of the members of the U.S. government who have perpetrated crimes of international importance against the Venezuelan people, with the application of a cruel and inhuman economic financial blockade and embargo, which prevents our people from having access to food and medicine. Through the systematic and intentional use of this embargo, it has become clearly a crime against humanity, according to Article 7 of the Rome Statutes. This is a whole series of unilateral coercive measures which violate the United Nations Charter and all norms of international law, and that are clearly geared to depriving all of the Venezuelan people from their means of subsistence. We await with interest the quick beginning of investigation into the case called the Venezuelan case. Despite our clear and manifest commitment to the Rome Statutes and the principles contained therein, and our actions of 3 years and our growing collaboration with the Karinkan office, despite all of that, we have to recognize it, as is natural. On some occasions, there have been some discrepancies with the vision of the court or the prosecutor of the court when it adopted some of its decisions. However, that has not prevented us from continuing to cooperate and communicate in a fluid manner with the court. To the contrary, throughout the last few years, we have been strengthening our dialogue with the prosecutor's office of the ICC, and based on the recent signing in June of a memorandum of understanding by which we establish a framework for opening an office of the prosecutor of the court in our country to provide technical assistance and to support the Venezuelan legislative efforts, which are geared to establishing the truth and providing justice. Mr. President, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, on the 14th of August 2023, at the Appeals Court of the International Criminal Court, presented the basis of its case with regard to its appealing the preliminary findings, and through which was authorized a resumption of the investigation in the case called Venezuela 1. In the appeal, my country argued that on the 27th of June of 2023, there were errors in fact and in law in the report and the findings, misinterpreting international law and the Rome Statute, and therefore the result was contrary to justice and truth. With the presentation of
our appeal, my country hopes that attachment will be shown to international law. According with our national constitution, Venezuela is a democratic and social state of law and justice. We therefore demand respect of our constitutional system of justice, and we also take this opportunity to recall that since at least 2018, we have been denouncing the process that was begun by a group of countries before the court, which is clearly politically motivated and can be inscribed in the strategy of trying to bring about a regime change. It involves foreign intervention in Venezuelan affairs based on false accusations and supposed crimes against humanity, something that has never happened in my country. In that context, it's worthwhile bringing to the attention of this General Assembly what was said by the ministers of foreign affairs of the non-aligned movement countries during its most recent meeting in July in Azerbaijan with regard to this question. And I quote, they said, "We note with concern the recent decision handed down by the International Criminal Court to proceed with an investigation into the presumed crimes committed under its jurisdiction in Venezuela based on the demonstrated cooperation with the ICC in this regard and the proceedings currently underway in Venezuela, an exercise of its national jurisdiction and in keeping with its national obligations and international obligations as relevant. We further stress that this action is in violation of the principle of complementarity as set forth in the Rome Statutes, and therefore we request the ICC to avoid allowing its work to be politicized or used, and that would include as part of the loafer efforts or legal war, which just serves to promote specific agendas and undermine efforts to preserve the integrity of the Rome Statutes and the independence of the court, end of quote. Mr. President, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela reaffirms that the International Criminal Court is a court of last instance, and it establishes justice for serious international crimes rooted in national courts. National authorities, therefore, have the major responsibility of investigating and trying crimes which are defined as crimes in the Rome Statutes. The court is involved, the ICC is involved only when states are not prepared to or cannot act within their jurisdiction to undertake the national proceedings that correspond to them. I would like to conclude by emphasizing that my country, through the public ministry, which in addition to guaranteeing respect for constitutional guarantees and judicial proceedings, organizes criminal cases and proceedings when crimes have been committed, has been undertaking a series of reforms. It has adopted a series of innovative measures to ensure effective justice be served on national territory, and always seeking to provide reparations to potential victims of human rights violations. All of this is in full compliance with our national and international obligations in this area, and those that would include those that stem from the Rome Statutes, and in full correspondence with the spirit of cooperation, the Memorandum of Understanding undersigned between the ICC and my country. Moreover, we take this opportunity to recognize the work of public defenders who work at the ICC, whose efforts are fundamental to guarantee the proper functioning of the court. And we would also like to express our grave concern given the current labor situation of those public servants, and we therefore urge the government of the Netherlands, in its capacity as host of the ICC, to recognize their condition and return to the prior situation prior to 2014, whereby the taxation was similar to this other civil servants of the ICC in equal conditions. We also call for preservation of the objectivity, independence, non-selectivity, and impartiality and transparency of the work of the court. And we should avoid that it be used to advance dark political interests that run against the spirit of the Rome Statute and that undermine both the primacy of justice and human rights. Along these ideas, we conclude by rejecting in the most categorical terms the recent statement made by the United States in this very room 2 days ago. That statement shows once again the double standard applied in the area of human rights and its reiterated interest in politicizing the work of the ICC, whose judges and prosecutors have even been sanctioned due to the simple fact that they have tried to undertake investigations which are geared at specifically doing what other situations require, which is to provide justice and accountability for atrocious crimes. It's unthinkable, Mr. President, to try and supposedly promote great causes around the world while at the same time one chooses to turn a blind eye to the crimes committed by one's own nationals around the world, and then continue perpetuating over time impunity and a framework of impunity for the social genocide and oppression of an entire other people. This is not moral, and they do not stand on the moral high ground to make such statements about my country. It's enough to see so much shamelessness by the government of the United States and its satellites. It is time, therefore, to have justice and truth. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and I now invite the distinguished representative of El Salvador to take the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The Republic of El Salvador thanks the President for presenting the annual report on the work of the International Criminal Court. And with regard to the report, El Salvador would like to make the following remarks. The creation of the International Criminal Court was a crucial step in the evolution of international criminal law. This court reflects the commitment of the international community to guarantee that those crimes that are the most serious for the international community as a whole not enjoy impunity. 25 years after adopting the Rome Statute for the ICC, El Salvador takes note of the work of this important court in international criminal justice. We urge preservation, always, the institution as one that is permanent, independent, and of universal vocation. We further urge respect of the principle of complementarity in national jurisdictions. This principle makes it possible for the ICC to intervene when states cannot or are not prepared to try those who are responsible for serious crimes. In this regard, my delegation acknowledges that complementarity is essential to guarantee that there is no space for impunity and to adopt measures which are key for the protection of witnesses and victims. Mr. President, the relationship between the International Criminal Court and the United Nations is fundamental. The United Nations is the cornerstone of international cooperation, and the ICC has become a key and essential part of that structure. In that regard, my delegation takes note of the presentation of the reports A/78/322 on the work of the court in the years 2022 and 2023. We also take note of report A/78/321 on the expenditures and reimbursements received by the United Nations with regard to assistance provided to the ICC. We take note also of report A/78/320, which contains information which is relevant to application of Article 3 of the relationship agreement between the United Nations and the International Criminal Court. El Salvador encourages the promotion of capacity building in programs for legal reform and judicial reform supported by the United Nations in order to strengthen the institutional capacity and technical capacity of states parties to the Rome Statute, and also to train legal professionals geared to investigation and prosecution of international crimes. Capacity building clearly will make it possible to exercise the vital responsibility of states parties to the statutes to be able to investigate and try those crimes that are defined in the Rome Statute. And then, therefore, we believe it's opportune and very timely, the recommendations set forth in paragraph 71 of the report, A/78/322 in this area. Mr. President, we conclude reiterating my country's commitment to continue reviewing this item of the agenda. And we would also like to join in the co-sponsorship of the resolution that will be adopted after the plenary debate has been concluded. We will continue to provide follow-up to the work of the court that will make it possible to guarantee in its fulfillment access to international criminal justice so that it is respected and put in practice in a way that is lasting and in a way that prioritizes protection of human dignity of victims. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of El Salvador, and I now invite the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation to deliver her statement.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, a number of delegations have spoken here in this room about those lofty ideals, combating impunity and equality of all before the law. We support these principles. They're the right ones. Historically, my country has championed these principles. It was one of the countries behind the Nuremberg Tribunal. Russia was one of the most active participants in the development of the ICC's Rome Statute. We voted in favor of its adoption, we signed it, and we even began ratifying it. Like many others, back then, we genuinely believed that this court, the ICC, can continue the glorious legacy of the tribunals which were established following World War II with a view to condemning Nazi and militaristic criminals. The ICC was supposed to investigate the most serious crimes under international law. It was supposed to do so impartially and effectively. Very high hopes were pinned on the court by many. Most of the effusive language contained in the resolution we're considering today dates back to the first few years after the ICC was established. Back then, commendatory reviews were often given in advance, and yet they have little to do with the current situation at the ICC and around it. Time and practice have shown that the lofty ideals of justice were not destined to become reality. Hopes, it turns out, were far removed from reality. The trajectory of the ICC's development, or rather of its degradation, was very similar to the dubious achievements of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, which is famous for its clear anti-Serbian bent in its guilty verdicts. It's also known for whitewashing war criminals, including true butchers from a number of parties to the conflict. And it's only now that exotic courts of some sort established by the European Union, it's only now that they've started looking into these criminals. The ICC's main achievement is that it managed to outdo the odious ICTY in terms of how selective, partial, and politicized its work is. It's also excelled in brushing under the carpet the war crimes committed by its Western masters. Already back in Yugoslavia, Hague justice was a dirty word, and it's taken on new meaning thanks to the ICC. The ICC managed to refute the idea that combating impunity was a guarantee of reconciliation and conflict resolution down the line. The situation in Sudan and Libya is an excellent example of this. Experiments to transfer these situations to the ICC, these dossiers to the ICC, were not only unsuccessful, they meant a catastrophe for these countries, which stretched out over many years. Over the time that the ICC has been doing its useless work, we have a pathetic handful of decisions. The final verdict, well, you can count the number of final verdicts on one hand, on the fingers of one hand. Many cases simply fell apart at the investigations. stage, and billions of dollars were spent on these less than impressive results. The ICC's regular budget, a punitive machine wielded by the collective West, its budget is 3 times higher than that of the International Court of Justice, and this is without counting the hundreds of millions of dollars which Western countries funneled into that sham Ukraine case in the guise of voluntary contributions. Against this backdrop, the ICC's regular attempts to justify in front of the Security Council its flagrant years-long ineffectiveness on Libya and Darfur justify this because it doesn't have sufficient financial resources. Well, that's a pitiful excuse. And yet, the West has certainly got bang for its buck. Since the ICC was established, 52 persons were charged. 47 of them were from Africa. That's a very interesting statistic, given that the worst, the bloodiest mass atrocities in modern-day history were committed by the West. An African colleague referred to the ICC as the International Colonial Court, and it wasn't in jest. The ICC has degenerated into a truly political tool for prosecuting those who have crossed the West. The neocolonialists, meanwhile, are enjoying total impunity, regardless of what they do, and this is in the best traditions of the so-called rules-based order instead of the law-based order. And examples abound. This court and its pet prosecutor, a British national, well, the West simply had to snap its fingers, and the court deprioritized an investigation of civilians dying at the hands of NATO, including women and children. Similar situations in Afghanistan, Libya, and Iraq. Hundreds of thousands of victims, and yet no one is held responsible. That's the justice you get at The Hague. And in a similar fashion, the ICC is making up cases as soon as its Western patrons tell it to. For instance, the arrest warrant issued against Mr. Gaddafi, which was cooked up in a matter of 3 days. These were shameful instances. Cases are fabricated against states which are not to the liking of the Western patrons of the ICC. The Gaddafi case was so outrageous that even the test tube wielded by Mr. Powell at the UN Security Council pales in comparison. And yet the ICC did its job. It dehumanized the Libyan leader, creating a fig leaf for the NATO aggression in the country. As a result, the country and its economy lie in ruins. Mr. Gaddafi was killed, and no one was held to account for this. Many perished from NATO bombs. Hundreds of thousands of people went up in flames during the Civil War, a war of all against all. Many drowned at sea, heading to Europe, looking for a better life. Or some did make it ashore and saw outrageous discrimination and inhumane treatment on the part of those who destroyed their home country. And who has been held responsible for this? We see total impunity at the ICC. So-called arrest warrants were issued for a number of Russians hastily just before the Russia-China summit. And this was a shameful circus. It doesn't have anything to do with justice. And the pretrial chamber actually had to replace the judge very quickly. In fact, when the prosecutor sent his request to the court, to the chamber's composition had been finalized. But who cares about procedural norms when you have political orders to execute? The prosecutor got his bonus, by the way. Just a few days before he sent his request to the ICC, his younger brother was released from prison. This was early release. His brother was a former British MP who was serving time because of a paedophilia crime. The issuance of warrants happened days before the donor conference in support of the ICC in London, and the sponsors there said that all of the money they were pledging should be spent exclusively on holding Russia to account. In other words, interested parties are paying for the proceedings they commission. Just think about this. What justice is there to speak of? The charges brought against Russians, that's a whole other issue. Not only are they groundless, there are violations of international law on the immunity of state officials. They're nugatory in legal terms and inhumane. These Russians are being accused of evacuating children who'd been left to their own devices from an area where hostilities are underway. So if we follow the ICC's logic, we should have left these children in the line of fire. This is how the ICC believes justice should be done. Against this backdrop, it comes as no surprise the ICC's position and the position of its patrons regarding the tragic events which have been ongoing now for 3 weeks. The civilian population has not been evacuated from the area where hostilities are underway. Thousands of children have died owing to indiscriminate shelling. Hospitals are being shelled regularly. Patients, doctors, and emergency workers are being buried under the rubble. Hundreds of people are suffering due to lack of water and medicine. Some UN system agencies have woken up and have started talking about possible war crimes. Where is the much wanted ICC? Where are the arrest warrants? Or are those issued only when you save children, not when you kill them? The Office of the British Prosecutor is making some general political pronouncements, threatening taking Palestinians only to court. This again demonstrates the true nature of the ICC, its ideals, the purposes it pursues, and the interests, whose interests it's serving. Thus, the ICC's attempts to position itself as a body acting on behalf of the international community look simply silly. The idea that it has an international generally recognized mandate has nothing to do with reality. It's divorced with reality. This is a pseudo-court. And in fact, over 1/3 of UN member states are not members of it. They represent over 50% of the Earth's population. Many have been compelled to stay at the ICC because they've been threatened. So we've had an overview of the ICC's work. Let's compare this situation, this unsightly picture, with the draft resolution. The document has been frozen since 2016. Any links to reality were severed long before. In 2011, this pseudo-court signed its own death sentence when it came up with those fakes regarding Mr. Gaddafi. Most of the positive assessments of the ICC's work were included in the resolution back then when it was being established, before it had started its work. In fact, this is probably the only golden days the ICC has known in its history. Aside from the scandalous exterior, the situation within the court is just as problematic. It's completely opaque. The elections process is dubious, and there is no equal geographical representation. All of the top positions are invariably occupied by Westerners and their satellites. They're doing everything within their power to stop developing countries acceding to the helm of this repressive political instrument wielded by the West to fight against those who are not to their liking. Another issue is the link within the resolution between the ICC and the UN. It does nothing for the credibility of the UN. The panegyric resolution under the GA's consideration stopped reflecting reality long ago, including because showing the true state of play in the text is simply impossible because of the implacable position of pro-ICC activists. This is what the ICC has degenerated into. And we do not intend to live with this text, even in its frozen form, any longer. We don't want the GA to remain hostage to idealistic views, which have been refuted by reality over the course of the ICC's 20-year decay. We demand to put the draft resolution to a vote. We call on all states which are not indifferent to genuinely combating impunity, who are in favor of equality and the sovereign equality of states in particular, to join us in voting against this resolution. Thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and now invite the observer state of Palestine.
Thank you, Mr. President. In all of 2022, across all conflict areas around the world combined, around 3,000 children were killed, 3,000 too many. In 3 weeks, Israel killed 3,600 Palestinian children in the Gaza Strip, more than all the children killed in all conflict areas in a year. Of the 8,800 Palestinians killed so far, more than 70% are children and women. Nearly all are civilians. Is there anyone here, anyone with a shred of humanity and decency, that thinks there is any justification for that? Anyone here that believes these numbers are possible if Israel was not targeting civilians, or at the very least, conducting indiscriminate attacks? The rules of international law came in response to tragedies we failed to prevent. We remember the names of these tragedies. They are the names of towns, cities, provinces,
forever etched in our collective memory as open wounds, as stains on humanity's conscience, as reminders of what happens when the worst occurs and the many remain silent. In that list, Gaza's name is in bold. It appears several times for the decades of military occupation, for 16 years of blockade, for 5 wars, and now more than ever, for 3 weeks, where the Gaza Strip has been besieged and bombed with no regard for the life of 2.3 million Palestinians who live there. The international community has failed those who were killed. It is failing the besieged, the wounded, the sick, the displaced. But thousands of lives hang in the balance. They can still be saved. There is no way to describe what Israel is doing in the Gaza Strip as anything else than war crimes. Let me reformulate. There is no way to describe what is happening as anything less than war crimes. If you recognize these acts are committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population, if you recognize they are committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national group, then they are genocide. These are the choices: genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes. Which one does any country here wants to try and justify? Is there any country still ready to evoke unconditional support for Israel while it is committing these atrocities, while it is occupying, colonizing, besieging, killing, and maiming? As member states of the United Nations, you pledged unconditional support to the UN Charter, to the rule of international law. Every nation has to choose where its loyalty lies. What is clear is that support for Israel in this war is incompatible with that pledge, with your obligation to uphold international law. International law, as a leading humanitarian NGO puts it, the humanitarian rule book has been thrown out, and polite pleas from politicians to minimize civilian fatalities are naive at best, and at worst seem blind to the unimaginable horrors already taking place in Gaza. International law is the standard against which all our actions are measured. Condoning double standards can only undermine and jeopardize the credibility and rule of international law. No exceptionalism for Israel, and no exception for Palestine and the Palestinian people. You know how what is happening in Palestine now is possible? One wonders, looking at these images, how is this possible? Not for one day, not for two, for days and weeks now. Live on TV screens being broadcasted around the world, massacres taking place. You know how it is possible? Read the Rome Statute. It has all the answers. It states, determined to put an end to impunity for the perpetrators of these crimes, and thus contribute to the prevention of such crimes. Impunity leads to recurrence of crimes. 75 years, not a single Israeli leader or commander or soldier has been held accountable for the crimes committed against the Palestinian people. Not one. We joined the ICC almost 10 years ago and still await for justice to be delivered. There were countries to oppose us joining the ICC. There were countries to oppose the General Assembly seizing the International Court of Justice. How can they explain
why Israel can never be held accountable in any form or any forum. This is not what history taught us. It taught us that our best chance against horrors is for the law to be upheld, for justice to be ensured, regardless of the identity of their victims and regardless of the identity of the perpetrators. That there is no justification whatsoever for war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. None. The Israeli permanent representative stood in the Security Council and placed a yellow star on his jacket, evoking the Holocaust, while at the same time justifying the bombings that are killing Palestinian civilians by the thousands, children by the thousands. No one can instrumentalize the Holocaust to justify atrocities. No one. We honor the victims of the Holocaust and all victims by never justifying the killing of innocent civilians, by upholding international law for all. The Holocaust was one of the worst horrors humanity ever witnessed, and with other horrors led us to elaborate the very rules that are being breached today. The Charter, the Geneva Convention, the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. It led us to adopt the Rome Statute 50 years too late and build a court with a universal calling, not for one group against another, but for all humanity. Are we not part of that human family? Are Palestinian civilian lives less sacred? Does anyone here agree with Israel that we are subhumans? During each statement delivered here, every 5 minutes, a Palestinian child is killed. When we say every minute counts, we mean it. It's the difference between life and death for hundreds of people, for thousands of people. Palestinian families have lost 10, 20, 30, 40 of their relatives, killed en masse, several generations at a time. Some have disappeared from the face of the earth. You have families. You have grandparents and parents and siblings and children and grandchildren. Think of them. And then think of a single Palestinian family that have lost all of them, or of the child that survived all of the rest of his family and who has to go through life with that reality. Hundreds of Palestinian families have lost more than 10 members of their family. Nothing can justify this war going on for a single minute. Nothing. We have 2,000 Palestinians under the rubble. We can't reach them. Can't save those who could still be saved. Can't bury those who were killed. A mother said she could still hear her child under the rubble. She will never know if he could have been saved or not. She will never know. Never again means never standing idly by while atrocities are committed. It means never justifying such atrocities under any pretense or pretext. It means standing up to them and standing up for those enduring them. The General Assembly adopted a resolution grounded in morality and legality, calling for an immediate, durable, and sustained humanitarian truce, for upholding international humanitarian law and the protection of all civilians, for humanitarian access and aid to the Palestinian people throughout the Gaza Strip, for release of civilians held captive, for stopping and reversing forced transfer of population, for accountability, and for peace. We appreciate all those who voted in favor of that resolution and call on them to spare no effort to ensure its implementation. And we call on those who did not vote in favor of this resolution to review their untenable position. We appreciate every effort to get humanitarian aid in. We appreciate every effort to allow to save lives. But the only way for us to address this catastrophic situation underway is to stop the assault immediately. We call on the prosecutor who made an important visit to the region in the midst of this unfolding tragedy to uphold his mandate, and all states to help ensure accountability. We need your unconditional support to civilians, including children, to the humanitarian personnel performing in impossible conditions. 67 of UNRWA staff have been killed. Many doctors, many rescue teams have been bombarded. Many hospitals, many schools are under the bombs. There's no safe haven, no safe place in Gaza. People are asked to go south, and the south is under the bombs. 40% of those killed were killed in the south. Don't believe the lies. There is nothing called an evacuation order to protect civilians. Israel has admitted in this memo of the Ministry of Intelligence that the goal was the forced displacement of people outside of the Gaza Strip, outside of Palestine. The same goal pursued over 75 years. We have 75 years of experience to know Israeli goals. It is not to protect our civilians. It has never been to protect our civilians. It has always been to dispossess and displace our people. This is an unlawful order. Nobody should justify it. The protection follows the civilians. It's not the civilians who run after protection. They should be protected wherever they are. This order is a death sentence for many who cannot leave where they are. There is no shelters, no infrastructure to receive them. There is not a single safe place in Gaza. We need your unconditional support to the wounded and the sick, to the law, to humanity, to a reality where no Palestinians are killed and no Israelis are killed, where our rights are no longer denied, where families are reunited in life, not death, where we are all able to live in peace and security. Only one path can lead us there. No one should obstruct it. All should help us on it. It is the one we identified when we joined the ICC with 3 simple words: justice, not vengeance. Thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of the Observer State of Palestine for his statement. We have heard the last speaker in the debate on this item. The Assembly will now take a decision on draft resolution A/78L6 entitled Report of the International Criminal Court. For your information, the draft resolution has closed for e-sponsorship. I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat.
Mr. President, I should like to announce that since the submission of the draft resolution, and in addition to the delegation listed on the L document, the foreign countries have also become co-sponsors of A/78/L6. Albania, Andorra, Argentina, Australia, Austria, Barbados, Belgium, Belize, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Botswana, Bulgaria, Cabo Verde, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Croatia, Cyprus, Czechia, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Denmark, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Estonia, Fiji, Finland, France, Gambia, Georgia, Germany, Ghana, Greece, Guatemala, Honduras, Hungary, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, Japan, Latvia, Liechtenstein, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Madagascar, Malawi, Malta, Marshall Islands, Mexico, Montenegro, New Zealand, Nigeria, North Macedonia, Norway, Paraguay, Peru, Poland, Portugal, Republic of Korea, Republic of Moldova, Romania, Samoa, San Marino, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Slovakia, Slovenia, South Africa, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, Trinidad and Tobago, Uganda, Ukraine, United Kingdom, United Republic of Tanzania and Uruguay, If any other countries wish to co-sponsor A/78/L6, please signify by pressing the microphone button. I see Gabon. If the delegation of Gabon turn off the microphone button unless there is any other change. And I see Congo. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Secretariat. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution A/78/L6, please signify. Those against? Abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/78/L6 entitled Report of the International Criminal Court. Will all delegations confirm that the votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
Ready? The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 115. Against, 6. Abstentions, 31. Draft resolution A/78/L6 is adopted. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote after the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation of Brazil.
Mr. President, as I mentioned during the debate, the difficulty to achieve consensus for the first time in this annual resolution highlights the need for us to reflect on how we may overcome the current pressing challenges faced by the International Criminal Court, rather than simply disregarding them. And this is why Brazil has chosen to abstain. Achieving universal adherence, addressing concerns related to partiality, selectivity, and double standards, ensuring effective state cooperation, fostering coherence within the international legal system, and rectifying geographical imbalances within the ICC's institutional structure are some of these critical challenges. It is essential that the ICC conducts a thorough self-assessment of its current activities as outlined in its annual report, addressing these and other concerns to further its noble mission of ending impunity for the most serious crimes of concern to the international community as a whole. In closing, Mr. President, allow me to reiterate Brazil's unwavering commitment to international law and international justice as underscored in my remarks during this debate. I thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished delegate of Brazil, and I now invite the distinguished delegate of Israel to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Israel was an early advocate for the establishment of the International Criminal Court. However, Israel has decided to abstain for the reason it has expressed in previous years when it disassociated itself from this resolution. As a democratic state based on the rule of law And as the nation of the state of the Jewish people, we remain committed to ensuring that the perpetrators of mass atrocities that deeply shocked and conscious of humanity are held accountable. In that context, Israel has already stated that it has launched a national investigation in relation to the barbaric and ongoing crimes committed by Hamas against Israeli children, women, and men in a murderous terror attack that started on October 7th, 2023, and will seek to hold those responsible to account. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Israel for his statement. I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, my delegation chose to join the states that voted against the draft resolution and the states that clearly expressed how dismayed they are from the unprecedented politicization of the performance of the ICC. My country was among the states that effectively participated in the Rome Conference in 1998 and contributed in an important manner in the drafting of the statute of the court. We were among the first states to sign the statute of the court. However, the stumbling performance and the selective approach by the ICC since it was established was the reason for not signing the statute, despite the fact that the work of the committee was simultaneously aligned with some of the most heinous and serious crimes committed in Iraq, Afghanistan, and occupied Palestine. The record of the court was full of failures of betraying the victims of the Iraq and the Afghanistan invasions, as well as the violations by Israel, the victims of Abu Ghraib, among others. Today, 25 years after the adoption of the statute of the court, we became confident that we were right to take that position against the court and not to ratify its statute. Mr. President, it is truly regrettable for us to see the fact that the court has been taken hostage by directives from Western states, including some Western states, including the United States, that have ratified the statute, and to draft decisions and legislations to obstruct the work of the court. We all remember the ASDA, the Act to Protect the servicemen of the United States, known as the Lehigh Service Law. Have these states rediscovered the court, or along with their Western allies decided to redefine the court by turning it into a tool to bring pressure to bear and to bring coercive diplomacy in the face of certain states? These states are, by coincidence, African states. What a coincidence. Most of the countries that were targeted were African states, as if those gross violations are a trademark of African leaders. This has happened despite the fact that history taught us otherwise. History taught us that the most heinous crimes committed in Africa were perpetrated by the West and continues to perpetrate it against Africa and the peaceful people of Africa. Things did not stop there. The court has turned recently, or the speaker says, started issuing subpoenas on demand, international subpoenas on demand. And this is a new service. These are new customer services. And even if these subpoenas were to face senior officials from non-member states, this is against the rules of international law on sovereignty, personal and otherwise, agreed upon by customary law and confirmed by the decisions of the International Court of Justice. In full view of the world and on TV screens, we witness an act of genocide that continues against a whole people in Gaza. Where is the criminal court while all of this is taking place? The court decided to remain silent or only to make declarations. The court decided to stand idly by while children are killed, where hospitals are targeted, and even those who are already dead are targeted. This is exactly the position that was clearly understood due to the court's position towards Palestine. As for encouraging member states to adhere to the court, it would be tantamount to being asked to be partners to the crime and to remain silent while these crimes are committed. Most of the leaders and the Israeli war criminals who clearly declare that they are determined to annihilate civilians, to destroy Gaza, and to deal with the Gaza people as human animals, all of those, I say, have citizenships of member states in the court. All of those, I repeat, have citizenships of countries in the court in addition to their own. And this is against the court's statute in rule number 12. So why won't these states who claim to be protecting international justice, why don't they submit them to the court? Why doesn't this apply to ISIS? Because most of the ISIS members are citizens of these states. My answer is because this does not serve the interests of these states that are partners in the crimes committed by the Israeli occupation and those of ISIS. We do not exaggerate when we say that silence by the court towards the crimes in Gaza makes the court a partner in the crime, and it is a partner because it did not move. It was a partner when it divided the Sudan, in destroying Libya, and in failing the victims of Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, and Afghanistan. In conclusion, sir, what I said before are not claims. Those are facts confirmed by history. And therefore, talking about the universality of international criminal law, which the court is supposed to be representing, or that is what it was supposed to have represented, is something that includes an exaggeration. We might be better off admitting that the selective performance and the systematic targeting that now guide the work of the court has ridden the concept of international justice from credibility, and therefore we are now with the justice of the victors, of those who took revenge, and those who financed. Thank you.
May I take it that it is the wish of the General Assembly to conclude its consideration of Agenda Item 74? The Chair recognizes the distinguished delegation of Israel.
Thank you, Chair. We regret that once again the Palestinian delegate has chosen to exploit this esteemed platform and exhaust its vulnerable time.
You ask.
Would the delegate of Israel please indicate whether the statement he is in the process of making constitutes a right of reply?
We want to have a right of reply, Mr. President.
The exercise of the right of reply has been requested. May I remind members that statements in the exercise of the right of reply are limited to 10 minutes for the first intervention and to 5 minutes for the second intervention, and should be made by delegations from their seats. I now call on the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. We regret that once again, the Palestinian delegate has chosen to exploit this esteemed platform and exhaust its valuable time by sharing misleading information and inflate numbers, seemingly running out of valid legal arguments. We should all remember, there is no law without facts, and the facts are very clear. Hamas, the genocidal terrorist organization, started this war, and Israel has the legal and the moral right to protect its citizens, period. Hamas is the ruler of Gaza Strip. Hamas is behind this attack, and it will be held accountable for the ramifications of its actions, period. In this asymmetric lawfare, everything is asymmetric. There is one side, a democratic state, which abides by the international law and does everything within its power to minimize civilian casualties, and on the other side, there is a genocidal terror organization which blatantly ignores and violates international law time and again, and strives to maximize the civilian casualties on the Israeli side as well as on the Palestinian side. If the Palestinian delegate and their supporters' concerns are genuinely for the well-being of Palestinians in Gaza, we suggest they address Hamas, which hides in the tunnels under hospitals and whose actions and use of civilians as human shields significantly impacts the situation on the ground. The right thing to do is to condemn Hamas. If they won't condemn Hamas, as they haven't been refusing to do since the massacre on October 7th, perhaps it would be better if this forum would focus on developing the international law rather than being influenced by those who wish to spread false information and political agendas. Thank you, Mr. President.
May I take it that it is the wish of the General Assembly to conclude its consideration of Agenda Item 74? It is so. Members are reminded that the 43rd plenary meeting of the 10th Emergency Special Session will be held immediately after the adjournment of this meeting. The meeting is adjourned. The 43rd plenary meeting of the 10th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly is called to order. The floor is empty. The General Assembly will continue its consideration of Agenda 5, entitled Illegal Israeli Actions in Occupied East Jerusalem and the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory, to resume the debate on the item pursuant to the decision taken at the 40th plenary meeting on 27th October 2023. Can I encourage delegates to, if you need to consult, can you do so outside the room so that we can hear the delegates who will make presentations this afternoon? I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, the ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to salute you using the innocent civilians